A good king knows when to save his strength. And when to destroy his enemies.
So you agree? The Starks are enemies.
Everyone who isn't us is an enemy.
Hi, I'm Joe.
And I'm Tiana,
And this is Next Door Villain.
a podcast where we uncover the villains to discover their humanity. Wait, does Cersei have one of those long names?
Oh,
No,
right.
she doesn't.
One of those names.
First of her name, whatever. I don't think so.
Yeah, it's just Cersei Lannister.
I don't think I've ever heard that.
All right. Hey everyone, and welcome back to Next Door Villain. We are here this week to talk about an infamous villain of the last decade, made popular by HBO's Game of Thrones. Would you like to announce the character, Tiana?
Yes, I would. She is just the overseer of ruthlessness and power. Cersei Lannister.
Ooh.
Ooh,
Yeah, I shuddered a little
bit.
bit.
Just thinking about her, and thankfully we have all watched Game of Thrones and finished that dang show, so now we get to talk about it.
As always, and it probably goes without saying, there will be some serious Game of Thrones spoilers in this episode, so if you're not caught up yet, then you might want to do that.
Yeah, even if you're not caught up, you've probably been on Facebook or Twitter and have already been spoiled.
That's true. Yeah.
And special thanks to Joe for not having a life for a certain amount of time and binge watching Game of Thrones so that we could talk about Cersei.
Yes, I think I started, like mid-March?
Yeah.
And then finished in April.
Yeah, that's very impressive.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
The benefit to that is that I feel like I'm much more familiar with the full content. I didn't experience it over, what, was it 8 or 9 years that the show was coming out over, with like multiple years sometimes between seasons.
Yeah. So there's a group of people who have kind of been able to digest it a bit, like throughout that whole time. But then there's people like us who binge watched it, and yeah. So
Yeah,
we'll
so
see how our analysis goes.
Yeah, let's jump right into it with our 30-second intro challenge, where we rush to try to barf out an introduction of the character.
This is going to be so hard because there's a lot. There's a lot about Cersei. But we will try. We either win or we die trying to do a summary.
Hey, that's just like in the Game of Thrones.
Oh my god, really?
Yeah, what a coincidence.
If you lose, you die.
All right, do you want to go first?
Oh god, sure.
Great. 3, 2, 1, go.
Cersei Lannister was married to Mr. Robert Baratheon, who was actually the king, not Mr. And then she's in love with her twin brother Jaime, but then a lot of things go awry, and she kills Robert Baratheon, and then eventually all of her children die because she does all of these schemes to try and win the throne, and a lot of people are trying to defeat her, including Daenerys Targaryen and also the Starks, and then eventually she dies in dust and crumbles.
Nice.
All right. 3, 2, 1, go.
All right, Cersei is a daughter of Tywin Lannister. He's one of three. She's one of 3 children that he has. Her twin brother Jaime, and then she's got a younger brother who is a dwarf. That's Tyrion. And she's the oldest of the 3 siblings, and she feels like she's entitled to all of this power, and she's really like wants to have power, and she really cares about and loves her children a lot.
Boop, boop, boop. Okay.
All right, I feel like I maybe didn't get as much information out there as you did.
How do you put 8 seasons into 30 seconds? I don't know, but hey.
I kind of wanted to start out today with a little bit of refresher on how villainous this character really is, because even me, who watched this show over the past couple of months, I still forgot some of the really horrible things she did. So I just want to rehash a few of those quick. So the first terrible thing that we really see Cersei do in one of the first episodes, she kills Sansa's pet wolf because Arya's pet wolf bit her son, but they couldn't find that one. They couldn't find Arya's wolf, so she just decided they needed to kill Sansa's instead.
That's like helicopter mom times 1,000.
Yeah. Another terrible thing, she forces this lady to watch her daughter slowly die of poison over the course of like a few days.
Yeah, that's bad.
Yeah.
But it's also because the people of Dorne killed her daughter.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. What is it, tit for tat? Is that?
Tit for tat, yeah.
Her son Joffrey, who is just a royally terrible person, does one nice thing, which is at the request of his betrothed, he decides that he's going to give all the food from this feast to the poor people. And Cersei just can't stand that. So she decides to make them send all of the food to the pigs.
Dang. Yeah.
I think almost everyone remembers that she blows up the sept and kills hundreds of people. So that was pretty bad. She blames her brother Tyrion for the death of their mother. And she's just like constantly bigoted towards him for being a dwarf.
Mm-hmm. You know, it's pretty obvious she killed Robert Baratheon out of fear that Ned Stark was going to tell him about her illegitimate children with her twin brother Jaime. She imprisons the Tyrells by working with the Sept of Baelor. As you can tell, this is not in chronological order. We're just kind of jumping around here, but
yeah.
Yeah. And then another thing that ticks me off is how much she butters up Joffrey, her son, just like, you can do anything you want. You can be in charge of the truth. Everyone who isn't us is an enemy. Blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
And he's already an asshole, but she's like making him more of one, just fueling that danger. And
Yeah. So because this is a podcast about empathizing with people and not just like rubbing their name in the dirt, I think the obvious question that this all kind of presents to us is, why is she like this? Why is she so ruthless?
Yeah, and it's okay to admit that she is very horrible, but we're going to try and find some understanding of her, and we're going to do our best.
Yeah. And I think the first point we want to talk about is something that she really brings up herself very early on in the show when she says, and help me if I get this wrong, she says, in the Game of Thrones, you win or you die.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you think about all of her actions in that context, you kind of like really realize what the stakes are for all of her actions. If she's not successful, then she's probably going to be killed.
Right. And that's what it is. It's the game. Of Thrones, right? It's all about this game and playing it to become the most powerful person in all of Westeros. And in order to do that, you have to be pretty bad. You have to kill people for it. And she's very realistic about this fact. She's not afraid to put down others and put them in their places in a way to show that she is gaining power and in a way to stay in power. I mean, she basically tells people death threats, basically tells people to screw off. She's aware that vulnerability and being nice and having love can make you weak. And she literally says that to Sansa. And I think everyone in the Game of Thrones, if they are too vulnerable, will end up dead.
Yeah, I think we see that a lot throughout the show, is that the characters who aren't willing to be ruthless are often the ones who are unsuccessful. And really, when you look at all the characters and you start to pick apart the things that they've done, Cersei's actions don't seem all that ridiculous or all that terrible. Because the truth is, when you just look at those actions individually, they seem bad, but they don't tell the full story. Because there are a lot of other terrible things that other characters do that at face value are really terrible things. But because we are following their story and we're telling a story from a perspective that makes them heroic, that we don't hate them for it. One particular example that really sticks in my mind is when Arya served Walder Frey a pie made from his sons whom she had murdered.
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't see this happen in the show, but just imagine what Arya would have had to do to murder those sons and then bake them into a pie.
Right. And we really cheered her on for it. She was framed as like a hero.
Mm-hmm.
But then you take Cersei and you start to realize that if she would have let her guard down, she would not be on the Iron Throne. Like, for example, if she would not have killed Robert Baratheon, more people would have found out about her relationship with Jaime, and then Robert Baratheon probably would have killed her. There's so many other examples of how you see if someone is vulnerable and shows love, how they can then be really screwed over in this game. Like also Robb Stark, when he married the love of his life instead of Walder Frey's daughter, he was then murdered at the Red Wedding. And he had love, and he was showing that love and became vulnerable in that time and moment. And so I think she's very calloused and needed to learn how to play this game as she was born in the Lannister family and has been brought up in an elite family who seeks power, and she learns from people like Tywin Lannister. She learns from her brother, who also went back on his oath to kill the king so that the Lannisters could be even in more power. And so I think Cersei Lannister continues on the wheel, where she wants power and strength for the elite only, and she kills to gain power. And that's how people have been doing it for centuries. Or at least we know that people have been doing it even when the Targaryens were in rule for 300 years. That's how you stay in power, is you kill your enemies and you move on. And that's how a monarchy stays in power. That's probably even, I'm not a history major, but that's probably how other monarchies in real life have worked too. You kill your enemies and people who threaten you, and you're strategic about it too.
Just to put some more perspective on some of the terrible things, I just want to rattle off a few other. So Stannis Baratheon burns a lot of people alive just because a witch told him it would be a good idea, including his own daughter. That was actually one of the worst moments in the show for me, was when she was...
That was bad.
Yeah. Jaime, well, right in the beginning of the show, he tries to murder Bran. He does a lot of terrible things, but another particularly notable one is when he sexually assaulted Cersei over their dead son's body. Sansa feeds Ramsay alive to his own dogs. Theon was just kind of a general douchey bro guy. Just like...
Theon.
Yeah. Insensitive. He just has kind of like a masculinity complex. And even though his junk gets chopped off, actually, I think that was probably a good thing for him. He really kind of nicened up after that. He was scarred after that. He has bad PTSD. Oh my God. I guess. I really struggled to ever really gain sympathy for Theon. Anyway.
I had so much sympathy. He was bad, but I don't think he deserved that. I don't think he deserved crawling on the floor and begging for mercy by the hands of Ramsay for however long that went on for. Oh my God.
Yeah, perhaps not. Yeah. I'm not going to speak anymore on this.
Okay.
Because
going off track for Theon.
Anyway, so I think that kind of the general point we're kind of trying to get across here is that she's ruthless because she has to be, because she's learned that that's what you need to do to survive. And that honestly, her ruthlessness is not that unique.
Mm-hmm. If you were brought up in that type of family, you probably wouldn't be so nice either. You would probably have power as a pretty strong value that's rooted inside of you, and the need to be aggressive and on top. Even like in the flashback where you see the psychic, you can already tell she's conditioned to expect to be high status now and in the future, especially when she asks the psychic, I'm told that I'm going to go off to the prince, and the psychic is like, you will be queen, and she's pretty happy about that.
Yeah. I think actually the psychic gives her some really strong motivation to do some of the things that she does, because the psychic tells her that her 3 children are going to die before she does. They tell her that her younger brother is going to basically come after her. The psychic also tells her that a younger woman is going to come and basically take her place on the throne. And throughout the show, you see her making decisions and choices that are constantly informed by that psychic. Like, for example, she's never really nice to Tyrion, and part of it is because she's kind of traumatized by her mother's death. But I also feel like she's also worried that Tyrion is coming to take over her, and she's got this paranoia because of this thing the psychic had told her. And she has reason to believe it because the things that the psychic said are slowly coming true throughout the series.
That's another huge motivation for why she hated Marjorie Tyrell so much too, and the Tyrells, because a younger, beautiful queen is going to take over. Same thing with Daenerys, and Cersei just can't accept that someone will take over her. And one thing that's kind of admirable about Cersei is that she wants to kind of defy fate and change things for herself. And she's doing everything that she can to do it. And it's almost like she believes she has the power to defy that. Yeah.
And why shouldn't she? When you really think about it, why does anyone in this show have a right to that throne?
No one really has a right to the throne.
Like, the Baratheons certainly didn't.
Yeah.
The Starks certainly didn't.
Right.
I mean, the history that we know gives us some idea to like think that maybe Daenerys has a right to it, but we don't know how the Targaryens came into possession of the throne. They might have just stolen it from the people before them.
They certainly did.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
Certainly did. When I was watching Game of Thrones, I was like, maybe Gendry should just be king because he's the son of the most recent king. No.
Yeah.
But it's really hard to say, like, who really deserves it. And so then that gives room for people to believe in their heart that they deserve the throne for X, Y, and Z reasons. And Cersei's not the only one who believes that, right? So continuing on about the game and how to play it, one of the things you said, Joe, in the beginning of this episode, one of the many terrible things that Cersei has done is when Joffrey wanted to serve the common people the food, she went over to Pycelle and told him to throw it to the dogs. And it was like, what? She doesn't want him to do this one good thing. And that also makes her look pretty bad. But what I want to really talk about is that, again, this is all part of the game as well, because Cersei knows that Marjorie is helping the common folk and the poor people, not because she has a soft heart, but because Marjorie is trying to gain that power and favoritism from the people because she's going to be queen. She wants to be a successful queen. And Cersei does not like that. She feels threatened by that. And so they're both playing a game in this whole food debacle. And it's Marjorie who influences Joffrey to give the food to the common people, but it might not be seen as a big deal to Cersei to stop food from getting to the poor people when she knows that it's just an act of political power. So when you think about it that way, you can see how much the game is just ingrained in her head to make her seem so ruthless. And she is, but the game, it's what motivates so many people, and it's what motivates her quite intensely.
That's a good example because I think a lot of people really liked Marjorie, partly probably because she's young and attractive, but also because she seems to be relatively nice to people. But you're right. Her niceness is in a lot of ways the way that she is playing the game. And it's like, are her actions really great if their motivation is not great? That's a question I don't really have an answer to. Yeah.
And Marjorie was kind of fake. And Cersei didn't like that. They just don't get along at all. And during those episodes, I was rooting for Marjorie because she was nice to the common people, but she's also just doing it for political gain. And then you can kind of flip the perspective around a bit and see how Cersei is feeling like she's being attacked or being stripped of power. And Marjorie, to Cersei, doesn't even deserve it because she's just this airhead from Highgarden.
Yeah. Both Marjorie and Cersei are in this precarious position, which I think really kind of leads into our next topic really well, in that they are both women who desire to be in power, but they're in a society where women are more or less used as political pawns for men to create alliances and to
gain land.
Yeah.
Even.
And so they're both kind of using their ability to sway men as a way to get their own power and control because, unfortunately, there's no real path for them otherwise. You can certainly imagine how frustrating that must be to Cersei, who, as a young child, kind of had some of those tendencies of not wanting to be like the other girls and wanting to be a little more of an adventurer, but she was forced into this typical, like, feminine role. And then she was married off to Robert Baratheon, who did not treat her well, cheated and slept with other women all the time, was openly in love with another woman for their entire marriage, probably abused her, raped her. This was a terrible position for her to be in, and she was in it for many, many years. And now she's finally fighting her way out. She is a woman in a society where women are essentially political pawns for men to use to create alliances with other houses and aren't really entitled to any kind of power or responsibility in the way that men are.
And Tywin was still in power. He was Hand of the King. She often felt like she was in the shadow of men. And I can see how she just doesn't want to be used as that political gain. I know she believes that she should be the one who wears the armor.
Right. She's the oldest Lannister, and the only reason that she is not in this messed up world entitled to some kind of ruling power is because she's a woman, and because she was married to Robert Baratheon against her will in order to bind the two houses and create some kind of new strain of power that created some kind of alliance.
It's very frustrating. Even Tyrion ends up having more power than her in some instances when he's the Hand of the King. And to her, I think she believes that she can play the game well enough to be in charge. And she witnessed Robert Baratheon, who, I don't know, he kind of seems like a intense war guy or addicted to war and grubby
drinking
man.
and
drinking. She looks at these men and she's like, wait, I can do this better. Like, I know how to fight for my family and I know how to put that person down so that they stay away from my children. But this guy's just clunking around eating meat. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, and I think if you want to sympathize with Cersei, I think one way to do that is to look at another character in the story who has a very similar storyline, and that is Sansa, I think. Sansa is also, like Cersei, is married off to someone who is not going to be great to her, Joffrey. And fortunately for her, that doesn't work out. But then she's married off twice, or she's attempted to be married off twice more to other terrible men. And luckily for her, she ultimately escapes. But we can see that hardens Sansa and that teaches her, and she learns things from these situations. And ultimately she does some pretty terrible things as well, like feed Ramsay to his dogs, though arguably somewhat justifiable considering the things that he did. But you can see kind of that same cunning and intelligence and seriousness in her that we see in Cersei. But we like Sansa because we grew up with her and we got to see her go through that transformation and we got to see the terrible things that happened to her. Whereas Cersei, we come into her story after she's already been through more than a decade of a terrible marriage and having to watch all of this stuff happen around her that she has no control over. And that's got to be really frustrating.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And I think that Sansa also learned from Cersei, too, in how to kind of thwart morals a bit to be on top, kind of like how Sansa did not keep Jon Snow's secret that he was a Targaryen. She's also using these tactics to get what she wants.
I don't remember the exact conversation, but at one point, I think it's Jon is talking to her about a plan that involves Cersei, and Sansa is trying to tell him that she should have a say and that she's intelligent. She knows what she's talking about. And he says something like, oh, it seems like you admire her or something like that. And she says, I learned a lot from her.
Like, I hated her, but I learned a lot. Right.
Which I think it's very telling, where, like, if we had heard a story from Cersei's perspective from a young age and then watched everything that she had to go through, she might be a hero in very much the same way that Sansa is.
But yet we root for Sansa when she becomes Queen in the North. And then we hate it when Cersei is on the throne for, justifiable reasons too. But everyone, I guess, that's the point. Everyone, including Sansa, does things that you can say are not morally right in order to get ahead.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, and I like your comment that Sansa has a really strong affinity for her family too, and for people who are like you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like...
And that's also strong motivation.
To the point of starting to become a problem where, John, who is such a dork so often,
he knows nothing.
He's just running around trying to tell people about this terrible thing that's happening, and he's trying to save everyone's life. And he understands that there is a greater responsibility to people as a whole than to their individual houses. And Sansa is constantly trying to be like, what about our house? What about our family? We're the Starks. We're the leaders in the North. It's so frustrating. And it frustrated me while I was watching it. And I think part of that was because that was the same thing that I was seeing in Cersei that I felt like was a problem. Like that there is this inherent birthright and that you have to be dedicated to your family and there's no responsibility to care about anything else.
Yeah. And I think humans naturally do that, where even if it's not your family, but you are close friends with people, you tend to take their side and want to fight for the people that you love and care about. And I think we just see that kind of as a bigger picture in Game of Thrones, or as more intense Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
More motivations for why she's so horrible. Because I haven't forgotten that she is. I'm not saying y'all should do what she does, but we're just trying to find some understanding, right? Another thing too is this is so weird to say, but so I don't have any siblings, so I guess maybe I can say this, I don't know. But if I had sexual relations with a brother and someone was going to rat me out, and the consequences could range from everyone on Facebook knowing about it and exiling me to some kind of
death,
weird rehab, or death, to death, I would probably take some intense actions to try and stop them from doing that. Especially if people find out and they're going to kill me or they're going to disown me, whoever is going to rat me out, I'd probably try to kill them.
Well, yeah, and it's tough to defend someone who's hooking up with their sibling because they're hooking up with their sibling, because it's kind of a weird and uncomfortable thing to wrap your mind around. So to kind of better connect it to your own life, just think about, is there something that you care about and that you love that's not accepted in regular society, that people think is weird or abnormal, or it just makes other people uncomfortable? And then imagine that being shared with other people, and you kind of can put yourself in a similar mindset as Cersei when she's considering what would happen if people found out about her and Jaime.
Another thing too is, I know on the internet people have talked about how they would psychologically analyze Cersei, and they would say that she's very narcissistic and entitled. And someone who claims that they're a clinical psychologist has said, I would say that she has narcissistic personality disorder. So, I can't really comment on on her psychology, but I can kind of talk about how, when she's growing up, she's also conditioned to have a sense of power and to have these self-centered values growing up in this world, in this Lannister family that seeks power. And her father has sought power, and her siblings seek power. Having power and having a sense of power, or even being close to being someone of great power, can make you put your morals aside, or at least manipulate them for the benefit of yourself. And this Atlantic article, How Power Corrupts the Mind, is when people start getting in power or growing up in power, they tend to have self-centered values and they become not so great people. And I guess the article suggests that almost anyone has the ability to take things a bit too far when they start gaining power. I mean, we see this in CEOs, we see this in presidents, in prime ministers, we see this in, in real life, how people in power can do very immoral things to either stay in power or just kind of feel entitled to not needing to follow any kind of good morals. The point is that people in general, not just Cersei, can have the ability to be not so great when you're given the staff and the agency to do what you want in power. And she's so close to the throne that I can see how it gets to her head to do things like kill people so that she stays in power, because you just get more and more entitled.
Yeah. So I think kind of the final big thing that we haven't really touched on specifically, that's a really kind of a keystone characteristic of Cersei, is that she really cares about, or at least really pretends to care about, her children. That's like her big thing throughout the show is, I love my children so much. I'd do anything for my children. My children are so important to me.
She even says that she would like throw herself from a building if she didn't have Joffrey.
Which she didn't have Joffrey, and she didn't throw herself from a building.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I struggle with this. I struggle with believing that she truly cares about her family in the way that she says that she does. But at the same time, in a way, her family, her children specifically, are an extension of her, and specifically her male children give her a path to power that she cannot achieve by herself as a woman in this society. And so the success of her children is really ultimately, probably to her, the success of herself.
And it's impressive that she just circles in on a womanly part of her to use for power. So it's almost like she starts to embrace the reproductive control to gain power, and embraces that women can do that to then use their sons. But then she's queen regent, so she knows that when her child is in power, then she is in power behind the scenes.
Yeah. Though ultimately, and maybe what's really impressive about her is that even when her children are no longer in the picture, she still manages to maintain that power. And I think it's really impressive for her as a woman to be able to have created the power that she has near the end of the show.
Yeah. In a way, I know a lot of people would say, well, Cersei's really bad because she uses her children. But on one hand, the children also use her to know what to do when they're king. And on the other hand, I think anyone has potential to use others to gain things. You could ask yourself, have I used anyone to then get farther in my career? Or have I used anyone to be seen as better than that other person, or to take credit for what they've done? I don't know. But I'm sure all of us have done it in some way, even if it was kind of a minor offense. Like when you're in a group project and you use your group members to get an A on the project. No. You use what you've got to get what you want. And
really, she, in a sense, she won the Game of Thrones for a lot of the time, more than just about anyone else did in the show. And that's impressive in its own right.
So then, in some ways, you could almost argue that she was right in how to play the game.
Yeah.
To be ruthless and to kill everyone in your way. Otherwise, she would not be standing there.
Yep. And the only reason she lost is because a giant dragon came and destroyed her city.
Right.
Without that dragon, I think it's fairly clear that she would have won. She would have been able to protect the city.
Right. Oh, yeah. And another truly horrible thing that Cersei has done is not help them fight the White Walkers. And we oftentimes look at that as wow, she's so mean, callous. Oh my God. She won't even help us keep the human race. But then when you even think of that, she did have a pretty strong army because of her decision to not use her armies against the White Walkers. And you're right, if it wouldn't have been for that dragon, I think there is a very good chance that she could have then defeated Daenerys Targaryen.
I really, really thought she was really terrible for not helping them out against the White Walkers. In hindsight, though, yeah, if she had sent her army up there, they would have been depleted and she would have been in a terrible position. So I'm starting to rethink her decision. Like, they were either going to kill the Night King and win, or they weren't going to kill the Night King and they were all going to die. And she chose the position where if they did win, that she would be able to come out on top. And it worked.
It was a mean strategy, but it was a strategy.
Yeah, so Cersei.
Cersei!
I understand that you have prepared some kind of a poem.
Yes, it's a poem/poetic monologue. Very short, though, so I promise it won't take too much of the listener's time.
Yeah, well, actually, that's perfect because I think that we've babbled on for much longer than we typically do. There's just so much to talk about with Game of Thrones and Cersei.
I know.
I'd like to hear it.
Oh, yeah, okay. I recited this to my boyfriend, too, because he watched Game of Thrones. He doesn't have a very poetic mind, though, so his only comment was, cool. So maybe you'll think the same way. All right. This has no name. Forgot to give it a name.
A poem has no name?
Yeah. Oh, good one. I like that. Okay. The lioness roars a proclamation of power, of prestige, of presence. The savannas are the basin of life. Her steps keep the cranes and sparrows centered in the skies. My eyes overlook the world. My eyes look upon buildings that glisten or collapse. Bowing was the only viable solution after the hyenas walked in front and gawked to take what is mine. The hyenas stay bowing after they stop laughing. They bow out of clarity when blood seeps from them. My walk is the declaration of being alive, in spite of it all, in spite of my chest that keeps the depths of the ocean inside of it, the deep ocean with creatures who carry disappointments on their backs. I have always known how to get out of the water. My hands direct the songs. My eyes see the barricades in my way. My voice bellows when no one else's can. The world keeps glistening. It's not that I hope it will, but I know that it will. My coat will pass down to keep the winds cool. My roar demands it. My roar is final. The dragon has a million strengths, the wolf a cunning fight, but the carcass remains in my teeth. That's it.
Cool. No, that was good. It reminded me of a particular moment that I can't even believe that we didn't talk about this entire episode, which was her walk of shame.
Yeah, that was a pretty intense moment because it was one of the few times that you saw her really vulnerable. But I think it gave her more reason to stay on top. I think she saw the common people and saw how bad they can be and how they need her to put them in order.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's my interpretation, at least. But
I think even if you can't empathize with her in any other way, I can't imagine how someone could watch that particular scene and not feel for her in that moment. Despite everything else she does, there's no way you can look at that walk and not have sympathy for what she's going through.
Right. Especially because even when I think about myself and just the average person, we are all like sinful in certain ways to the point where the sept of Baylor probably believes that all of us should do that walk of atonement. And she was the one caught, right? Like everyone, especially in Game of Thrones, does very immoral things. But she was the one who was caught and forced to walk through that crowd with shame. Shame. So we could almost picture ourselves there too.
Yeah,
thinking about it, we did some bad things too.
Yeah, I've done some. Yeah, yeah. You know, on that terrible note, we should probably wrap up.
Right.
But if you're listening still at this point, then you're probably a Game of Thrones fanatic, and we would love to hear what you have to say about Cersei. As always, you can connect with us over Twitter, Facebook, email. That's nextdoorvillain on Twitter and Facebook, and nextdoorvillain@gmail.com. gmail.com for email.
This episode has been produced by Joe Anderson and Tiana Hennings. We really hope that you can rate us on wherever you get your podcasts, like Google Play and Apple Podcasts, and also talk to us on Facebook and Twitter.
Yeah.
We're so lonely.
Yeah, we are. Thanks for hanging out with us.
Yeah.